Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're absolutely delighted to hold this event that is showcasing some examples of the innovation in teaching and the dedication to the provision of high quality teaching and learning for our students in this college. I'd like to congratulate all the winners for their fantastic achievements, and really looking forward to the upcoming brief presentations. So I will at this point just hand over to our college principal, Professor Cecily Kelleher, for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Sue, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. It's great to see so many colleagues here around the call. And it's very exciting that we're going to have this teaching and learning showcase event kicking off shortly. So as you all know, at the heart of our mission is education, and to provide a third level education institutional experience for our students. And we do so in many flexible and formative ways, whether one-to-one, group, large lecture, practical, or indeed blended events. And in the last year, 2020, 2021, we've had an experience like no other. We've been faced with many challenges posed by the global pandemic, and done so with excellence and dedication. It has been a group effort by our staff and our students, and we thank all who have contributed in this extraordinary time. The Teaching and Learning Awards mark such excellence. And the most recent round was characterized again by applications of the highest caliber and standard. And this afternoon, we showcase and share some of those. And I very much look forward to see them. I'd like to thank Jonathan McNulty and all the teaching and learning team, all those who participated at every stage in this process. And I now declare the session open. Firstly, we have a montage of the awardees, and then we'll move on to the presentations. And I'm looking forward very much to it. Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Cecily. And as Cecily mentioned there, we'll first show a montage of the awardees. These are the college awardees. So from both the teaching excellence and the outstanding contribution categories. And obviously some of these awardees have gone on to be nominated for university awards, and indeed some have been successful in receiving awards at university level. So I'll hope the technology works for me now. Just bear with me one moment, and you should just shortly see on screen and hear, hopefully. In the Teaching Excellence Award, excuse me, Caroline. Sorry, we'll go again there. In the Teaching Excellence Award category, Caroline Elliott Kingston, School of Agriculture and Food Science. Catherine Redmond, School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health System. Katie Wedgeworth, School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health System. Debbie Wallace, School of Medicine. Catherine Howell, School of Medicine. Kate Fraser, School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health System. Lorraine Carroll, School of Nursing, Midwifery and Health Systems. Marion Marr, School of Medicine. Mark Pickering, School of Medicine. Mary Forrest, School of Agriculture and Food Science. Mary Higgins, School of Medicine. Melinda Halaz, School of Medicine. Olive Lennon, School of Public Health, Physiotherapy and Sports Science. Sandra Nicholson, School of Veterinary Medicine. Thomas Campbell, School of Medicine. David Kilroy, School of Veterinary Medicine. In the Outstanding Contribution to Student Learning category, the Team Awards. The MSc Ultrasound team from the School of Medicine. Practice Placement Education Team for the MSc in Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics, School of Public Health, Physiotherapy and Sports Science. UCD Centre for Safety and Health at Work, School of Public Health, Physiotherapy and Sports Science. A bit of an abrupt end there, apologies for that. But congratulations to all the college award recipients as well. And we're delighted that all of those award recipients are represented here today. I think with the exception of the Nicola and Ruth from the practice education team in the MSc Clinical Nutrition and Dietetics who couldn't join us this afternoon. So without further ado, we're going to move to the next part of the agenda, and part I think we've been all really looking forward to. And that's to, I suppose, hear from some of our award recipients, the college award recipients who were subsequently nominated or put forward by the college for university level awards. And we're delighted that all of those individuals have agreed to share some of the work that has helped earn them those awards with us today. So we've a nice mix of different topics that will be covered, and you will have seen that from the schedule. So all of our presenters have been given strict instructions to try and keep to their 7 minutes that has been allotted so that we can stay on time for today's event. I'm delighted to invite our first speaker, Dr. Conor Buggy, who I believe is going to speak on behalf of the Centre for Safety in Health and Work, and is going to talk a little bit about supporting students returning to adult education. So without further ado, Conor, you should be able to share your presentation there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. So some of you may know me, some of you may not. Some of you might recognize me from our community choir. In 7 minutes, I'm afraid I don't have time for a solo performance today, but I'm willing to share with you some of the work that we do at our centre. So when Jonathan asked me to present on our behalf, I was like, what do you want me to talk about? And he said, well, one of the key things that came through in our application was our commitment to adult learning, but also people who may not have been in university for a very long time, or it could be their very first time in university. Something that we as a team are very passionate about, and it's something that we integrate into all that we do. So just in case you don't know who we are, this is our team. We have Anne, David, Anna, Penpatra, Gemma, and myself. And just to give you a little bit of background on who we are. So our centre is in the School of Public Health, and we have been in existence for over 30 years. And I have to say that Anne has been at the helm for most of that. So I'm not going to say anything more on that. I've been with the school with the centre for the last 11 years, but we have over 30 years of teaching and research between us, and we have multiple college, university and national teaching awards as well. So it was great to be recognized as a team, because to date we've had individual awards, but we haven't had an actual team award. So it's one of the things we're very proud of. But over that 30 years, we have had close to 10,000 students pass through our various programs. And that's something we're also very proud of. We're very cognizant of the fact that we're able to shape health and safety as a discipline in Ireland through our students. And we have a very great relationship with our students. A lot of our students come back to guest lecture for us as experts in different modules. So we have a very strong relationship with our students and our alumni, and it's one that we continue to strive for and to keep integrated as in everything that we do. So this is our team, as I mentioned them earlier. Anne is our Professor of Occupational Safety and Health. David is our Centre Manager. I'm the Assistant Professor in Occupational and Environmental Studies. Anna is our Administrative Officer. Penpatra is my colleague and Assistant Professor in Occupational Safety and Health. I work very closely with Penpatra. And then Gemma is our Executive Assistant as well. So health and safety, I'm sure some of you know, and some of you might not know a lot about it, but it is a young discipline where 40 years old really is where we're at. But we are part of public health. But one of the interesting things about health and safety is that most people come into health and safety as a second career. It's usually, you know, they're at a certain point and they've been landed with health and safety role, or it might be of interest to them. So they come into their education in health and safety later in life. So we have to be cognizant of that. I myself started my life as a scientist and then an engineer, and then I drifted into health and safety in consultancy before I came to UCD. So even myself, I came into it as a second career. Obviously, with COVID-19, it's a huge part of national response right now. And, you know, in the long term, you know, health and safety initially was all about safety, but we're seeing a transition to looking at long-term well-being of employees, because, you know, we need to consider how long we can keep people in employment for the sake of different organizations, but also for their healthy lives, because having a healthy workplace will lead to healthy long lives. So we're seeing a transition to looking more at workplace well-being as well. So we have 4 programs that we run, and two of them are undergraduate programs, and I'm going to primarily be talking about the 2 undergraduate programs in the next 3 minutes. Most of our students are adult professional learners, and they range in age from 18 to 60 plus. Some may only have a junior cert or an intermediate cert, believe it or not, and then some could have PhDs. But we have to make sure that they are all have the capacity to have an equitable learning journey across their time with us. And so we do have to do a lot of work orientating students back into what adult learning is like. And on our certificate course, which is our blended learning program, we have developed a lot of different tools, documents and videos that we have embedded into Brightspace and previously into Blackboard to assist our students with kind of orienting themselves to what it's like to be at university. We've also developed mapping, so giving them an orientation to how to get around Brightspace and how to access different resources in the library, access different resources in the university. We've worked a lot over the years with Access and Lifelong Learning, and Lisa Padden in particular, we've worked with to help develop a lot of these different initiatives. And our certificate in safety and health at work is our blended learning program. It's been blended learning for the last 7 to 8 years. A lot of our students that take that go on then to take our higher diploma. So we do end up with students transitioning from one course to another, which is great. But one of the great things Anne did, Anne developed basically a suite of different videos and documents, but also the mapping tool in Brightspace, so people can navigate around Brightspace with ease. And if you were to come into any of our modules, you will see that we keep the same structure across all of our modules to allow our students to navigate with relative ease. And between the 3 of us, Anne, Patrick, and myself, we have 28 modules to coordinate across 4 programs. So we make sure we try to keep life as efficient as possible for ourselves, but also for our students, so that they can navigate with ease. Anne actually won a National Teaching and Forum award for this mapping and for the work she has done on college knowledge for our certificate students. So she won a National Teaching Expert Award for it. So on the higher diploma in safety, health and wellbeing at work, and that's Panpatra and my main role, we have 3 modules where we really orient students back into education, but also bring them along their journey to become lifelong learners, because this is one thing in health and safety that's hugely important. We need to make sure that people are lifelong learners. In our 2 modules, Professional Skills 1 and Professional Skills 2, we reorient students to what it's like to be at a university. We have Dermot Stokes from the library comes in to show them about different library orientation and critical thinking skills. We do learning journey ideation, which is where we get them to sit down all together to discuss their entire learning journey from when they were a child up to the point where they entered their studies with us and what they hope for the future. We also bring in things like peer review, peer assessment, and we do interesting problem-based learning with them around workplace ethics and things like how to improve your skill set so that when you finish with us, you can go out and really find the job that you love. In human and organizational behavior, I take that a step further. I bring them into the whole process of reimagining learning. I bring them through doing a SWOT analysis of their own study skills and their own learning processes. I help them develop their own leadership in health and safety. And I get them to do a learning needs assessment, which is what they will also need when they finish with us, because they need, to undertake CPD as they progress through health and safety as a profession. So between those 3 modules on our diploma, we do a lot of work with them on, the value of learning, but also how they can become better learners across their program. And I know in 7 minutes, that's very quick to cover a lot, but one of the things that we have done is over the years, we have published various different case studies with access and lifelong learning. So if you want to know about Anne's College Knowledge Project, Chapter 7 of Universal Design for Curriculum Design, I have a chapter on how to utilize debating as a form of assessment and to improve communication skills in students. And then in the inclusive assessment and feedback universal case design studies, we have chapters on how we've redesigned modules to incorporate problem-based learning, self-reflection, and self-directed assessment, as well as how we can bring professional skills and authentic assessment together. So I think I kept it to 7 minutes, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Conor, for that, and congratulations once again to Conor and indeed all of the team in the Centre for Safety and Health at Work, and thank you for sharing that information with us today. We're going to move on to our next award recipient, from a colleague from the School of Medicine, Mark Pickering, and I've asked Mark to speak on one particular topic that came out in his application for a college teaching award, which relates to gamification in neuroanatomy and 3D printing. So without further ado, Mark, again, you should have the rights to share your screen there, and look forward to hearing this.
Okay, thanks very much. Hope everyone can hear me okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the teaching that I've been up to and things that I've been doing. But first, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about bees. And the reason why I'm talking about bees, I'm talking about a very specific population of bees. And I'm actually going to I'll talk about teaching in a moment, but I'm actually going to just mention a research paper. And it's this research paper here. And this is actually my favorite research paper. And it's about bee behavior, but that actually doesn't really matter, right? Because it's not really what this paper is about. What's interesting about this paper? The first thing that you'll notice is a very simple title, Black Autumn Bees. And the first author on it is P.S. Black Autumn, which is actually Black Autumn Primary School. So if you look at this paper, the figures in this paper are actually hand drawn by the kids who actually carried out this research. It's a fantastic read, and I recommend anyone just goes and read it. It's a thing of joy and wonder. But why am I talking about any of this? Well, the reason why this is one of the reasons why this is such an important paper to me is something that one of the authors writes in the introduction. And I'm just going to quote from it here. And they talk about the value of play and what play actually is. It says science is little different from the deeply resonant natural process of play. When one adds rules to play, a game is created. And this is science, the process of playing with rules that enables one to reveal previously unseen patterns of the relationships that extend our collective understanding of nature and human nature. And the point here is really that the process of science effectively is a formal process of a game. And through that game, you can actually discover new knowledge. So if that's what works as a researcher, if that's what works as a scientist, can we actually take that and apply that to the educational context? Because actually the idea is kind of similar. It's what we want students to do. What we want a learner to do is to come up with new knowledge and new understanding. So can we apply this principle of play and games to education? And specifically, one of the main things that I teach is neuroanatomy. And over the last few years, we've been trying to actually apply this to some of our neuroanatomy teaching. And we've been, just to give you a couple of very simple little examples, this is the type of thing that we've been doing. And this is using 3D printing, just making very simple little things. And this one is, these are a couple of examples here, which illustrate some sort of tools that we've developed. And we deploy these in the classroom setting to actually get students. And this is just some essentially pegs and rubber bands. In the other case, it's a 3D printed pegs and wool. It's a very simple little thing, but students essentially wire it up. So what we do is we put students into groups. We give them a few minutes, and it's a task. They have to actually achieve this within a few minutes, and then they actually have to explain what they've done to the other group. And we do this over and over. And this is a very simple little thing that we've been able to do. To give you another slightly more sophisticated version of a similar concept, one of the other things that we do is for example, teaching the Brodmann area, so the regions within the brain and what the sort of function of different regions within the cortex are. Now, I find the sort of traditional way of doing this very boring, right? So one of the major motivators for me, if I find it boring, then the students are probably going to find it boring. So sort of pointing at a brain and going, you know, that's Brodmann area 17, that's the visual cortex, it's just dull. So what we do in this case is we 3D printed a skull, which you can see at the top there. And then we 3D printed a mold that we can use to basically fill it with gelatin to make brains. So I occasionally go down to Tesco and buy vast quantities of gelatin. I'm pretty sure I'm on a list somewhere because of this. And then we get the students to put the skull over the brain and take this rod and essentially push it through it and create an injury. They then take the brain out and examine it and identify, right, if this was the brain of a patient, what would be the functional deficits that this patient would have? So these are little games and activities that we've actually sort of deployed into our teaching, and students seem quite receptive to this. And a lot of these involve 3D printing, and 3D printing is something that we've been doing. These are all prints that I've developed myself, but actually I'm not necessarily the best person to do this. And the other thing that we've been doing in recent years is we've developed a program running during the summer where we get students to actually design and construct their own 3D models for using 3D printing technologies for anatomical learning. And these are actually used in our teaching settings. So these are student-led development of educational resources. And the one on the right there, you can see the sort of the transparent brain. That was the first one that was created. And the student who actually developed it, the thing that always struck me when we were talking about it, she said that what she was trying to do was to create the model that she wished she'd had when she was learning this material first time around. So we're trying to harness essentially the student insight into this and a student perspective for better learning. This is all great. So we've been doing this for years, and as you can see, this is very physical, right? So these are all physical objects. And then in the last year, we found ourselves in a very different educational context. So now we're working online, and we've developed all of these things which were all about sort of physical hands-on activities. So how do we translate this? And one of the things I've been able to do from working at home, you know, trying to take advantage of whatever situation you find yourself in, I've been using my kids essentially to prototype some new ideas, which we might be able to deploy when we get back into the classroom with students around us. I reckon if a 7-year-old can do this, some med students can probably just about handle it too. The other thing then is that actually if we take back and strip away, the 3D printing is lovely and it's lovely to have these tools, but actually if we strip them away, look at the actual task, because the 3D printing is not the important part, it's the game, it's the task. And actually a lot of these translate very well online. And so what we've been doing is in the last year is in a lot of our neuro teaching is actually stripping away the kind of the traditional lecture format and replacing the lectures with activity-based interactive sessions. And we've been able to put some of these games in. So this is essentially the equivalent, and we've been able to use things like interactive workspaces, online workspaces like Google Jamboards. And this is one which is actually generated by students. And you can see here, this is the equivalent of them sticking rubber bands. In this case, they're just drawing onto a shared screen. So we've been able to deploy that. And again, but the other thing is that we've been able to do is actually been able to develop sort of new types of games and new types of approaches that are really kind of designed around the online environment. And one of the best, I think, examples of this is the sort of the virtual escape rooms. Now, I can't really take credit for this. So most of the teaching that I've been doing in the last year, I've been doing sort of hand in hand with my partner in crime and frequent co-collaborator and co-conspirator, Tom Flanagan. And it was him who actually came up with this. And these are essentially digital escape rooms. So in this case, what we have is students would be presented with a screen, and there's various clickable links on this, and they're given a puzzle to solve. We give them 30 minutes. They divide them into teams, they go away and they have to solve the puzzle. And these are all themed around different sort of learning objectives associated with the modules that we're teaching. And it's a competition, it's a race. It's like, okay, first group back is the winner. And it's been really, really effective. So that's me pretty much out of time. So I'm going to finish with just one very last thing, one last takeaway, 2 messages. The first is simply play more. And the second is play with others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really, really interesting. And I'll definitely be looking up that paper on bees as well. Took note there at the start. So, and I see some nods around the place. So I think others might be too. So thanks for that, Mark. So we now move on to our next presenter, who unfortunately can't be with us this afternoon. That's Professor Mary Higgins, a consultant obstetrician in Holles Street, and also a member of the teaching team within the School of Medicine as well. So I have a video of a recording of Mary's presentation, which hopefully I will be able to share with you now. Fingers crossed this works, or I'll be in trouble.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Higgins. I'm a clinician working in the National Maternity Hospital and an academic in UCD. This presentation is pre-recorded as I'm on call for the hospital today in case I can't attend. I'm going to talk about medical education electives, which is a new form of elective we have been offering in the National Maternity Hospital. Within the medical school, our students have a mandatory 6-week rotations or electives that they can choose in an area that you're interested in. They're usually clinical or research electives, but we had proposed an educational elective because education is a significant component of medical care, the education of patients, colleagues, and students. In spring 2020, we ran our first medical education elective. We had 3 students of face-to-face elective where we asked them as end users what would they improve in the modules, and we had incredible outcomes. The students developed 27 posters in areas that they felt we could improve our teaching. And they also developed a 100-page summary of 2 pages each on different topics in obstetrics and gynecology. This was well in excess of what they had expected, and they were very proud of the work they had done and deserved to be. Then came summer 2020. Having previously run a medical education elective, we asked, could we do it virtually and could we do it better? We had 9 students from both UCD and RCSI. We supported them with tutorials and workshops, and it was all virtual. And again, we said, what areas do you want to work in? The students developed a number of projects. Firstly, they developed a What Has Changed, a reintroduction to clinical care following the start of the pandemic. They developed a question bank of multiple choice questions. They developed a way of capturing clinical teaching that will allow us to both capture the informal teaching within the hospital and also to potentially contact trace students or staff should a student or staff member test positive for COVID. At the end of the 8 weeks of clinical teaching, we had recorded 5,000 hours of informal teaching within the hospital. And they developed a podcast called OBScast, which is freely available on Spotify and has been downloaded over 6,000 times. We kept going. They presented their research and reflections as abstract presentations, presenting grand rounds within the hospital, the Irish Network of Health Educators, of which they won a student prize, and they're going to submit their work to international meetings, including the Association of Medical Education and the Association of Study of Medical Education. They've had their research work published. They're currently at the review stage of the International Journal of Students and Partners. They've been published in the Irish Journal of Academic Practice, and Jane Fagan had an opinion piece published in the British Medical Journal. In January-February, we ran a 3rd medical education elective. This time we included a different subject. So as well as obstetrics and gynecology, we also included neonatology. Again, it was all virtual. We met the elective requirements. The students gained both theory and practice of medical education. The outcomes again were incredible. Using design-based thinking, the students developed 4 projects. In neonatology, they developed a video of how to do a neonatal exam, and they also developed a neonate passport for research within the neonatal intensive care unit. They developed a 64-page booklet of peer-assisted learning for students within Clinical 1 stage. And they did a 2nd season of podcasts for OBScast. So what did we learn? In both learning and enabling learning, students are amazing once they're given permission. In teamwork and collaboration, the results speak for themselves. As ever, there was some storming, but that's all part of teamwork. In developing networks and community of practice, we really don't have to say anything. And again, in creativity, it speaks for itself, but not just in the products, but also in the student mindset and their empowerment. So what's next? Our next elective in summer 2021 will hopefully be an interprofessional education, including general surgery, obstetrics and gynecology, veterinary surgery and veterinary nursing, and hopefully nursing and midwifery. And if anyone's listening to this and think you would be useful in contributing, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much to the college for this award. It's very much appreciated.
Sorry, I'm muted. In her absence, I'll thank Mary for recording that presentation and for sharing that medical elective work with us all today as well. So we now move on to our next presenter in this session, Catherine Redmond. And Catherine is going to speak to us or tell us about the topic using VARC to meet the needs of individual learners and approaches to universal design. So again, looking forward to hearing this presentation, Catherine, and over to you.
Muted. Sorry. Okay, can you see this?
We can indeed, Catherine, and we can hear you there, yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so I was asked to have a look at, or to present the VARC questionnaire that we're currently using for all our stage 1 modules. So this questionnaire was developed in 1987 by Dr. Neil Fleming. Well, he's not a doctor, sorry, he's an educator from New Zealand, and he's currently now in Canada in the University of Lincoln. And he's on tour, so he would be an excellent person as well to speak about his own questionnaire, because he's put up lots of little small videos around the questionnaire itself, which I have found extremely interesting and the students love. So if anyone wants to go to the website to have a look, you can find out a lot more about the questionnaire. So VARC stands for Visual, Oral, Read, Write, and Kinesthetic. So these are learning preferences that students have when it comes to their learning new information. So we very much stress this is about learning new information, of ways of taking in new information and of giving out information to others. So he would consider it almost like a communication questionnaire, because these are all the skills that we need in our communication. It's more than just an inventory, though, of different learning preferences. It is more than that. It goes forward and suggests strategies for each type of learner that may be able to help them to learn better. And I think that is the beauty of this, is that when students are enlightened to the type of learner they are, then they can become much more strategic in their learning, and they can change anything that we have given them to the style that suits them. And I think that's very important, that they're able to use the information themselves to become better learners. So we use it on the first day of our program. So I teach mostly biosciences, and this is in stage 1. And we actually have them at 9 o'clock in the morning on the first day of term. So you get all these, you know, hundreds of little faces looking at you that are very scared. And one of the first things we do is go through the type of learning that they may have done to date, and have they had a thought about their own learning style. So we put the link to the questionnaire up on the module, and we ask the students to do it in their own time. It's a 16-question questionnaire, and it's very interesting, nothing to do with biosciences. It's a very general questionnaire, which I'll show you some of the questions from it at the end. And for the students, it helps them to understand how they learn best. So it will give them, you know, once they answer all the questions, it gives them a chart and shows them, you maybe 9 out of 16 times you have said that you would prefer to be an oral learner or a kinesthetic learner. And many of our students are actually multimodal learners, and that probably the majority of them. I think the last time we had collected the data from the students, we had about 64% were multimodal learners. And that has implications also for educators, because if we have students that have different, that prefer to learn in different means, then we should be able to provide different means for them in our teaching so that they can learn that. And we've already seen from some of the earlier presentations, some of the means that you can use. You can have them doing things such as what Mark was showing, and you know, listening, watching. All of these are using different senses that are going to help with their different types of learning. But it's best as students understand how they learn first, and then they can study to their strengths. So this is one of the kind of the most common ways you see the learning style preferences used. It's Dr. Fleming is very keen to say that it's not a learning style by itself, but learning style preferences. That learning styles covers more than just the type of media that you like or the type of senses that you like to stimulate in your learning. You'll also have other constructs in learning styles, and those are constructs such as what is happening in the environment around you. So is it daytime or nighttime? Are you hungry? Is there a lot of noise in the background? So these are things that are not captured by the actual questionnaire. So that's why he said it's all about learning style preferences. But we do mention it to our students to consider what is happening to them when they're trying to learn, and to set up learning spaces and to think about these environmental issues that they might be able to control, but we can't control for them. And that's important. So even thinking of my own learning style, I know that as soon as I've done a few Zooms, then I have to change the preference, and I would go to, rather than reading or writing anymore, my eyes are tired, I will go to maybe looking at a diagram and following the diagram. And if students know that there are different ways that they can use that, if they are multimodal, maybe their preferred style is this one, but they don't have to always go with that, especially as they're getting tired or different things are interfering, that they can change to another type of style. And it's just getting them to learn about themselves. There is a lot of information out there on students when they come into university might be learning according to their teacher style from secondary school. And this is the way they've been taught how to learn, whereas actually it might not be their strength at all, and they should be opened up to all the other styles that are out there, and then how to play to their strengths. So if we just look at the first one in visual, so this is people with a strong visual preference for learning. So they like things like lists, ticking things off. So perhaps when we're doing a presentation, thinking of these students as an educator, you would have quite a few lists up there. So they'd love this with the bullet points and the ticks. They like graphs and charts, pictures, diagrams and cartoons, and maps and plans. So if they have an idea, when they go on the site, on the VARC site, they will find lots of ideas for themselves for how to study for themselves at home. So I've just taken out a few of these from Dr. Fleming's works. So things like charts and maps. If they're studying, they could use flashcards, use highlighters, circle things that they think are important, or underline words when studying. So in other words, if they're going back, if they're at an exam, they're actually nearly able to visualize exactly their own notes and where in their own notes is this information. So they're very good spatial awareness as well as things. That's part of being a visual aware. I think what he wanted to stress, that if he was doing it again, coming up with this questionnaire, he wouldn't have the word visual, he would have probably had the word graphical, because he says visual people think of maybe that suiting them might be videos and things, but only if the videos are very real, that it's not really those kinds of images, it's really more graphical or symbolic that they are, rather than what we might consider as visual. So people with a strong oral preference, then they like discussion, stories, guest speakers and chat. So really they like to listen and to talk. So there should be areas for this in their learning. So again, putting up discussion boards, which we have in our modules, the recordings. So actually the recordings have been very helpful for this group of learners now that everything has been recorded for them and they can play it over and over again. For themselves, they should shift any pictures and graphs that we may have on our PowerPoint slides into talk. So it's important that they individualize their own notes. And that doesn't mean just making them longer. Actually, the suggestion is if they get 3 pages of notes, they should reduce it to 1 page. So it's all about putting it into the medium that they most like. So discussion, the keywords for those are learning, discussing, talking, questioning, recalling. These are the way they would prefer to learn. If you have a read-write preferences, then again, you like text and all types of formats. So for these learners, they like writing their own notes, and they may make, so this is the only group that it suggests may make their own notes even longer than the notes they're given in class. So they could write away, they would do the suggested readings. So again, in all our lectures, we would have suggested readings for this type of learner that may want to go further. They might benefit from arranging any information into multiple choice questions. So we have some sample questions and they can do their own. And actually we're going to thinking about gathering, just like Mary has, gathering MCQs that students put together that will be helpful for us and for all students. So there's quite a lot of work still to be done from gathering what is the strengths of the students. And this kinesthetic learner is the person that likes to do things, very tactile person. So very much would enjoy Mark's work there. So they like to get a grip on things, to be able to play with it and move it around. They particularly like concrete examples. So when we're teaching the concepts in biosciences, we try and refer everything back to real life experiences. And we're recognizing that these are first years, but they still have illness scripts. Even though they're first years, they would have had illnesses in their families or in themselves or even in pets, and are able to follow. So even if they haven't done pathophysiology, they can follow if you give them a good example. So they would prefer to start from the example and then work back to the theory to try and get a handle on it. So these are very much people that like to be shown the broad aspect first. So keeping these things in mind is helping us to decide what interventions we're going to use in our teaching itself. So these students also like role play, but they like things that are very real. So if they are watching any videos, they don't prefer the cartoons like some others. They would prefer real live subjects rather than cartoony things. They also prefer, say, things like autobiographies to fictional work. So again, a lot of use of examples being done in class, and especially from our own. So the 3 of us that teach on this module are coming from a nursing background, and we're able to give lots of concrete examples of how they can use information in practice. And we would continuously get this coming up in our evaluations, show that they love the concrete examples. So from the literature on nurses' learning styles, they have a strong kinesthetic background, and I would presume this would be similar for most of the health sciences students. So the type of questions that are coming up on this questionnaire, there's 16 in total, and it's just giving you an idea, and they enjoy even doing the questionnaire. When I am learning, I see patterns in things, use examples and applications, read books, like to talk things through. And they can choose all that apply for them in their answers. The second one, a website has a video showing how to make something. There's a person speaking. I would learn most from just listening to it, seeing the diagrams, watching the actions, or reading the words. And for a lot of our students, even when you're looking out at the class, you can see some of them maybe with their eyes closed. And initially I used to think, well, perhaps they're actually having a doze, but I would now might think, perhaps these are students that are oral learners, and they often close their eyes and listen to what's happening. And for us, it meant we were putting up our notes in advance of every class, and so fitting in with this group of learners so that they would be able to do that. And the type of learning styles that you can actually change your teaching to meet these learning styles. So I didn't put anything particularly up on universal designs, but universal design for learning is actually looking at diversity of the students in front of you. So the diversity of learning styles was my thought on this little bit, and using our knowledge of these learning styles that we can actually plan a diverse range of activities within our lecture.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that overview of the work you've been doing in those first year nursing modules together with colleagues, as you mentioned as well. We'll move on to our next presentation now. This is Melinda Halaz from School of Medicine, who's going to talk to us a little bit about making large group teaching interactive, again touching on universal design and also on EDI. So Melinda, looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've got you there,
Okay.
Melinda. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melinda Halaz, and I'm teaching pathology in the School of Medicine. Jonathan asked me to talk about 3 aspects of my teaching practice: how I make my large group teaching interactive, universal design, and EDI. So I believe in student-centered teaching, and I promote active learning in my teaching sessions, both in the small group and large group setting. So firstly, I would like to share how I make my large group teaching interactive. I coordinate the hematology and immunosuppression module, where I have 300 students. The content in pathology general quite content heavy, and this can be daunting for the students. So after every few lectures, I introduce a review session, a case-based review session for the students. So in that hour, we discuss 2 or 3 patient cases. What is the most important, that I create a safe environment for the students, where the students don't feel intimidated. Also, to promote their participation in the activity, I reward the students answering the questions both correctly and incorrectly by some chocolates. In this session, we are following the journey of a patient with their disease. So what is imperative for the success of this session, that the students review those few lectures which we will discuss in the session. So I'm the narrator and the facilitator of this session in a way that I also play the role of the patient. So the students might ask questions from me about the history of the patient. And then we follow the steps involved in diagnosing of this patient. We will discuss treatment, and also we will follow the clinical course of the patient. These sessions are important because they promote the higher order thinking of students. The students can consolidate their previous knowledge, and they can apply their knowledge in the clinical context. So this can be perceived as an informal formative assessment. And in line with universal design of learning, this session can guide the goal setting of students, because this activity squarely aligns with not only the learning outcomes on this module, but also with the assessment strategy on this module. On this hematology module, I introduced these case-based multi-short answer questions, which would test the students' clinical reasoning skills and problem-solving abilities. These questions are easy to correct in the large classroom, and also it's easy on the students that they only have to provide a couple of words or few sentences. This assessment method is reliable. So here you can see that when the exam was only MCQ based, then there was a left shift in the distribution of the grades. But once the short answer, this type of short answer question was introduced, we can see that the grade distribution is very similar. And this type of question format worked in the online exam setting as well. So next, I would like to talk about universal design, and I would like to talk about mainly on multiple means of representation. So in the hematology module, I have a lot of international students, and all students have different learning needs, as we could hear from the previous presentation. So in terms of options of perception, I provide the students not only with text, but also I create them some images, animated images, and also time to time I show them videos of certain concepts. Also, because there are new terminology introduced in the hematology module, I provide them options for language. I create them some tables which easily summarizes the different terms which are relevant in the module. Also, I provide options for comprehension. For example, I prepare summary images on the differential diagnosis of anemia, for example, or I sum up all the hematological malignancies discussed in the module, or I give exercises to the students where themselves they can consolidate their knowledge. And lastly, I would like to talk about removing unconscious bias from the medical curriculum. So as we know, racism exists in our society, and with the Black Lives Matter movement, it was put in the spotlight. From recent publications, we know that hidden racism, systemic racism, is an issue in medicine and in healthcare, and therefore we need to review our educational materials because we need to provide each and every patient with the best possible care. So one of the areas that begs our attention is underrepresentation of images of skin symptoms from patients with different skin tones. So for example, some basic conditions like anemia, cyanosis, or jaundice, they would appear differently in individuals on paler and darker skin tones. However, the textbooks highlight the skin symptoms both with images and in the text part of the books for individuals with a pale skin. So it's important that if a disease is associated with skin symptoms, then we show the students the full spectrum of skin tones and the skin symptoms on these skin tones. So in the oncology immunopathology module, when I'm talking about systemic autoimmune diseases, this year I show students, for example, lupus, rhino phenomenon, or Kawasaki disease on both patients who have pale or darker skin tones. Another issue is that some medical textbooks associate with socioeconomic status and lifestyle with race and ethnicity, and the use of race as, and these textbooks use race as a disease risk factor. So race is not a precise category, and we are now in the post-genomic era. We are in the era of precision medicine, so we need to treat each patient, each person as an individual with their own medical issues. So first of all, we should use the country of origin if we discuss genetic predisposition to disease. So for example, sickle cell anemia, which is most common in Nigeria, should be depicted as a patient with Nigerian ancestry instead of using the terms like a child with a black child with anemia or an African American child with anemia. Also, we should provide context if we discuss race and ethnicity in connection with the disease. So we have to consider what is causing the unequal disease burden. Is this due to different socioeconomic status or other structural determinants of health? Is it due to environmental factors, or the difference what we see is because of different genetic ancestry? Also on exam questions and in our teaching cases, we should only include race and ethnicity if it's really important for clinical decision making and it improves patient outcomes. So for example, when we are talking about Burkitt's lymphoma, we shouldn't associate the disease with the Black child, as the sporadic forms can occur all around the world. There are a few cases diagnosed in Ireland as well. So if we would like to refer to the endemic forms, then we should say that there is a child with lymphoma, and this child lives in the malaria endemic region. And lastly, the students requested that we diversify our patient population in the teaching sessions. So this year I invited Esther Onolememen, who is the founder of the Sickle Cell Society Ireland, and she gave a patient advocate talk to the students on sickle cell anemia, which is an increasing issue in Ireland. 20 years ago, maybe there were 2 cases of sickle cell disease, but today there are more than 600 individuals who are affected by this disease in Ireland. And that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Melinda, for trying to fit in those 3 topics within that presentation. Thank you very much. We'll move on to our next presenter now, Olive Lennon. Olive is going to talk to us about embedding research into teaching through a PBL approach. So hand over to you now, Olive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can everybody see my screen there?
We can indeed, Olive.
Okay, thank you very much. So I've been asked today to talk about embedding research in teaching through problem-based learning. And I'm delighted to be here and indeed to be granted a college award and to represent the college at the University Teaching Excellence Awards. I like to call embedding research in teaching through problem-based learning, asking is the answer. In the presentation today, sorry, my screen not behaving here and scrolling down for me despite multiple chances. Here we go. Sorry. So I'm going to pick for today an example of a module enhancement. This is a stage 2 module in the physiotherapy program called Application of Physical Agents. And in this module, the descriptor states that students will gain theoretical and evidence-based knowledge of the safe, practical and effective application of electrophysical agents relevant to physiotherapy. The module enhancement piece really focused on evidence-based practice because this is where the feedback from the students suggested they weren't happy. Within this module, there are lecture-based teaching related to the theoretical underpinnings of the different modalities and the physiological basis for their use in tissue healing and repair. And the students also have quite a large section of clinical skills classes alongside this module. Evidence-based practice at its core is a very collaborative and collective decision-making process using the best available evidence, but marrying it with clinical experience and the patient's values and systems. Looking at the stages of looking to the evidence to inform this process, and there's a number of 5 stages where students formulate their clinical question based on the population, the intervention, the outcomes of interest, and indeed looking at the hierarchical evidence of study type to inform how they move through the evidence available to them. They then apply this formulated question to electronic databases to search for the evidence, to filter the evidence, then to appraise the best available evidence and apply it to clinical practice and evaluate the use of it thereafter. In the application of physical agents module, the evidence-based practice piece had been taught in a research-led approach where the evidence or the emphasis was on the research content, and the students were frequently engaged as audience members listening to the current research that was relevant to our discipline. The feedback from the students really suggested they weren't happy with this approach. They said they didn't see the relevance of the evidence-based practice lectures. They thought the evidence-based practice was drawn out and irrelevant, that the slides were dense with text and were read with little discussion or explanation, and they asked that the lectures be more applied and interactive. In responding to this feedback, my first thought and a quick implementation was looking towards more research tutored, where the students engaged in discussion around the evidence and debated the evidence. But where I really wanted to go here was looking at research-based approaches to evidence-based practice, where the students would undertake their own research and inquiry, and the emphasis in the class would be on the research processes and real-life authentic problems. And here I thought and wondered, would evidence-based practice with problem-based learning be a good vehicle for this? When going to the literature and looking at best practice in instructional design for evidence-based practice, and indeed the core concepts that should be embedded in problem-based learning, there were 5 congruencies or overlaps between these two schools. The idea of the importance of prior learning, of collaborative working, of reasoning and understanding, of collective learning in the process, and in scaffolding scholarship. So indeed, this seemed to be a very good match, indeed a match made in heaven, teaching evidence-based practice using problem-based learning. Then the next part was looking at the process of how to develop an evidence-based curriculum using problem-based learning to sit alongside theoretical lectures and practical classes. Here, the conceptual framework was established as a good match, and then we designed real-life authentic-based problems that will put the student in their workplace thinking about evidence and the relevance of the evidence to practice. Students then worked through an initial problem with very structured support through the iterative 5-stage process of defining their question, looking at the evidence, synthesizing the evidence, and applying it. As we moved on then to other modalities, students worked more independently in small groups with less support. We had opportunity for student debate, whether a particular physical agent was warranted, given a clinical scenario or a pathology, and they had good, robust debate on these subjects. And then the students at the end do a summative assessment whereby they present the evidence in support of a relatively new modality in reference to a specific pathology. In terms of the feedback from students, looking at our standard Likert scales from the university, we can see that across the 5 Likert scales, from before the evidence-based practice lecture-based to when it was taught to problem-based learning, all of these questions improved in terms of the reporting from students, notably the overall satisfaction with the module. I also wanted to see, was there a shift in their profiles of evidence-based practice in the students before and after the problem-based learning approach. And I used a standardized evidence-based practice profile questionnaire. And again, saw very promising changes in students' self-reported evidence-based practice terminology, practice itself, and confidence in applying evidence-based practice clinically. The feedback comments were much more favorable around the evidence-based practice component. They said they got familiar with researching studies and learning about what studies were good and reliable. They hadn't much experience doing this, searching for articles, finding reliable articles, and the module gave them experience doing it. They said they enjoyed the opportunity to use evidence-based practice in a very practical way, and they were more confident using evidence to guide the use of modalities. A student said it really encouraged you to do your own research. The more you did, the more it made sense. Now, I will say you can always rely on students to keep you very grounded, because I also got this comment back where a student said, I did not find this evidence-based practice very helpful as the lecturer focused too much on it and I lost interest. So you'll never get a big head when you have students giving you feedback, which is good, I have to say. I went on to publish this with colleagues across the university from the Centre of Teaching and Learning and from Medicine. I see Debbie Wallace getting an award here today as well. and this was published in 2019. So that's my brief presentation called Asking is the Answer, and using evidence-based practice in large lecture theatres and using problem-based learning as the vehicle. And I found it very effective. So thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much, Olive. And we'll now move on to Marion Marr. Marion is going to be talking, linked to the topics, creating an open learning environment for students and promoting active learning. So we'll hand over to you now, Marion. You should be able to share your screen there.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Can you see there?
Not yet.
No?
We're not seeing anything there
No?
yet, Marion.
Okay.
You should have the screen sharing option.
Yeah.
So if it is showing it's sharing at your end, maybe just stop sharing and then try to initiate it again.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, it looks like it's working from my end, Jonathan.
Unfortunately not. I'm not sure what the issue is there, Marianne, but maybe just perhaps with the PowerPoint as well, maybe if you shut down the PowerPoint and start up again. But what we might do is maybe move on to the next presenter and then come back to you if that's okay,
Yeah,
Marianne,
no,
just to
sorry
give you a
about that,
chance to try that. So if you don't mind, Tom, we might put you on the spot now as well. So we might just move on to Tom and we will come back to you, Marianne, apologies. So Tom's going to talk to us about making anatomy teaching exciting and engaging for multidisciplinary large groups. So hopefully the sharing, if you try it there, Tom, you should also be able to do it.
There we go. It looks like it's working.
Yeah, we've got you there, Tom. Yeah.
Can you hear me loud and clear?
Can indeed. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak here today about this topic. This has been a challenge really that has been puzzling me for about 3 or 4 years now. And solving it, I still think that solving it is a work in progress. And the problem is, if you've got a large group with many different student cohorts in it and one syllabus to deliver to them, how can you make it interesting for all of them? And I don't have all of the answers, but today I've summarized what I've learned in the past few years down to 3 take-home messages. So I thought I'd describe the cohort of students that I'm teaching. First of all, it's about 240 to 250 students on any given day, all together in a lecture. And these students hail from 5 programs: radiography, undergraduate and postgraduate, physiotherapy, biomedical health and life science students, and health and performance science students. And when we consider the professional, the end game activities for what these students need to do in their career, they're quite different. So I was really puzzled, what hooks might I use to drive engagement and make anatomy learning fun for these students? And it was also my first time to start lecturing, really. So I had to think about things that I hadn't thought about before in clinical medicine. And the first thing that I thought was, well, I need to remove any barriers, any obvious barriers to engagement with the material. And I need to implement learning activities that promote engagement. I need to shift the balance towards engagement. And the reason for that is I wanted to try and promote deep learning habits rather than surface or strategic learning habits. Because of all the reports, and I saw it myself as a senior house officer or as an intern in Irish hospitals, is that medical students, especially on surgical difficulties, they'd arrive to our team and you'd ask them a basic anatomy question and they would have known it straight away with lightning speed a few years beforehand, but it had completely slipped off as if they had Teflon memory. So I thought, well, my allied health students, they're probably the same. So how can I get this information to stick? And it really has been a work in progress. each year I've done a pretty rigorous review of the teaching modalities used, and it's improved slowly over time. It's not something that I got lucky and cracked straight away, so it's always evolving. The first take-home message that I learned in engaging this cohort is that the most important element by far is communication. And this is sort of stage specific. These are stage 1 students, and about 90 to 95% of them are coming straight out of school. It's the number of graduate entry students is very small, and they may or may not have a scientific or medical background. And what do I mean by communication? I mean all of it, verbal and non-verbal. So over the course of 3 months, how I deliver the basic anatomical principles is to use colloquial language at the start and gradually phase that out. And eventually around week 10 or 11 or 12, I would use fully anatomical and scientific language with the students and expect them to use it back when engaging with me in the classroom. And the reason why this is so important for engagement is that if this is not done, it constitutes a barrier to engagement. How can a student ask a question if they don't know the words to use? That's just a simple example. And students have consistently fed back to me that they really appreciated this approach. And when I said to them, did you notice that the words became gradually more scientific throughout the lecture series? They all said yes, and we appreciated the colloquial language used early in the lecture series. The other thing is the use of on-screen text for new words. Students voiced that it was a complete bugbear for lecturers to deliver lectures which were just pictures or graphs with no words. And I think that's okay for depending on the stage and the cohort, but for stage 1 students, they need a little bit of a helping hand. So if you're saying a new word in a lecture theatre, it's very helpful to actually display the word as text on screen. And also anatomy, as it has its own language, there are all these movements and directions associated with it. It's very important to actually physically demonstrate these in reality when you're discussing them. That really helps students to assimilate all the information into the true meaning of what's being said. And where I've used this principle most is in lectures, a little bit in practicals, but mostly in lectures. This is quite important. Now, the second thing is everyone wants to win the House Cup. And what do I mean by that? Well, some of you will either be avid Harry Potter fans or have kids who are avid Harry Potter fans. And you may have heard about the House Cup and Hogwarts and all that. But really what it's about is in J.K. Rowling's world, magical children attend a school to learn how to do magic. And when they attend the school, they're sorted into 4 houses. And the houses compete with each other to earn points. And at the end of the year, the house with the most points wins the House Cup. And houses earn points for academic excellence or good behavior in general or sporting excellency, this sort of idea. So how did I incorporate the House Cup into anatomical learning? Well, not formally. There isn't a formal point counter. The students would go bananas about that. But when I'm discussing a basic anatomical principle or describing a joint, I'll very quickly follow it up with a related medical case, something that just gives the students a slightly different perspective on the anatomy, and it encourages them to revise what they've learned and apply that knowledge to the case. But then I'll engage each cohort individually as if they were houses in Hogwarts and ask, physiotherapists, you're working as a pitchside medic and you see an athlete suffers this injury, they fall this way, and when you examine them, this is what you see, what do you think it is? And then continue on the case, the narrative of the case. Radiographers, this athlete now arrives in the ER and you take an x-ray, this is what you see, what do you think? And then with biomedical scientists, I can ask them more broader, sort of deeper thinking questions. So in this example, it's an image or a case of a fractured clavicle. I would ask the biomedical scientist, why do you think the clavicle tends to break at that location versus anywhere else? And students have consistently fed back that they really enjoy this term of this type of engagement. And it sort of lightens the atmosphere in the room because anatomy is very dense and material, and they enjoy the interdisciplinary competition. And even though they're sort of having a non-formal competition between themselves, they're actually passively learning about what multidisciplinary teams do, which is important because this is how they'll practice for the rest of their career. In terms of practicals, I did a lot of innovation on practicals and completely redesigned all the existing practicals, and eventually reached a point where each cohort has its own set of practicals. There are 5 stations in a practical. 4 of them are basic anatomical principles, and 1 of them is discipline specific. And that one station, which is discipline specific, allows students to really contextualize their learning and see, for example, when they're learning about all the ligaments of the knee joint, why this is important. And the great example is I will actually perform knee joint or knee ligament tests on students in the classroom, and other students will observe and we'll discuss it, and I'll show them how to test each individual ligament. And this is constantly referring them back to the basic knowledge that they've learned. And I think that this is a particularly successful way at engaging a cohort and generating deep learning habits, because my observation of this over all of the things I've tried in the previous few years is that students ask most questions in this situation, and students will only ask questions if they have assimilated some amount of information, perhaps contextualized it, and perhaps inferred it to something that they've experienced in their own life. So I think this is a really, really good way to do it in the practical setting. So there are the 3 main takeaway messages. I wanted to keep it short because there's lots of things I tried that didn't work, but this is what I think has worked. Communication is paramount. Bit of interdisciplinary competition is healthy, and task-specific learning, the idea of the authentic task and contextualized learning, it works really well here. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak about some of the things I've introduced to those modules.
Thank you very much for that, Tom. And I think Marion, we might jump over, just see if you're able to share your screen there. I do have your presentation now, so I can share it on screen if it's not working at your end.
Jonathan, it doesn't appear to be working. I've tried
problem.
it on a few other links and it doesn't appear to be, after a year of lecturing online.
It's typical.
It doesn't appear to be working today for me, no. So
No
I'd be
problem.
grateful. Thank you for sharing it for me there.
Well, there you have it. If you just tell me to go on, I will advance the slides for you.
Great. Okay. Well, just, yeah, you can move on to the next one. So I suppose just to give a brief background there, I work in diagnostic imaging. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the program, we have a cohort of 100 students. And this is something that has grown enormously and exponentially over the last few years. So where we were teaching to relatively small to medium-sized classrooms, in the last few years, we have moved to a large class teaching. And certainly, I suppose what you asked me today was to look at aspects of my teaching that incorporate active learning, active engagement, and how to create an open environment, particularly with such a large group teaching. Just on a background then, with regard to radiographers, we are regulated by CORU, the health standards, and we are teaching our students and hope that they will graduate with the standards and proficiencies of the knowledge and skills and competencies that we require for safe practice. So we are working within an academic forum, but also with a professional degree program. My other role then, just to show you where I have translated some of this, is in the postgraduate program, which luckily enough I was involved with setting up a couple of years ago and is online completely. So how do we kind of promote active learning in an online forum and try and create a learning environment for our online learners? So that's kind of a background to my teaching. I'm also stage coordinator, so I have quite a role with regard to mentorship of students, and it's the 3rd year of radiography, so stage 3 coordinator there. So if you could move on there. I guess going back to basics, how do you actively engage your classroom? Going back years, and certainly with our degree program, I believe in the art of storytelling and the art of storytelling for teaching purposes. We all remember great stories that we heard, but I think with regard to our students, they're coming in from varying backgrounds. They're coming in from CAO, they're coming in from the HERE process, the DARE process, their mature entry, their graduate entry, international students, elite athlete scholarships. We have a huge diversity of students in our cohort. Their knowledge and background is varied. Their experiences of radiography, of hospital-based medicine, of pathology, of anatomy is very varied. So I believe my role and how to engage them is to give them a clinical context, to give them professional context. They're all high achievers. I don't have to inspire them to want to learn. I don't have to inspire them to accumulate and to learn information. Where I have to inspire them is to understand why they're learning it. What's the clinical context? So my role also, I still have a clinical role. I still scan patients at a very advanced level. And I believe that bringing in the life experiences, the real life clinical cases into their classroom, discussing it with them, showcasing what's happening in hospital-based medicine, what's happening in the clinical environment, giving them the examples. And I suppose it's not enough. I suppose I'm a number of years in UCD now. It's not enough to rely on my clinical cases from 8-9 years ago. It's the current one. We work in an imaging environment. It's changing, it's evolving. It's one of the fastest changing areas of medicine. So keeping that up to date, keeping that relevant, giving them the story of current day medicine. And I think, does it work? I think with a good clinical case, with a good discussion, you can actually feel the atmosphere in the room changing, and that's with 100 students. You can almost feel the level of engagement. The questions start, the discussion starts. So I suppose at a very basic level, and probably the most impactful level, I believe in the art of storytelling and the art of context and the art of being relatable and being, I suppose, authentic and credible. So with regard to active learning, I think my first point and my first most reliable touchstone is to go to the art of the clinical case study, to go to the art of telling them how legislation is now changing our clinical practice, how medical devices are evolving to change clinical practice. So you can move on. Thanks. Secondly, I would say technology is one of the second cornerstone of my promotion of active learning. I use and rely on technology hugely, both in-class and online. The two examples I have here are Socrative, a student response system, where particularly, I suppose I've learned over the years, is particularly challenging topics such as technology of ultrasound, radiographic contrast agents, where after giving a lecture, the subsequent lecture, I will set up a quiz that students use their phones in class or laptops to answer, and the responses are displayed within class. So it's an instant response. We can see students are anonymous. I don't ask for their names. We can see where the comprehension issues are, how much they know, where their difficulties lie. And this information I can save for further years so that I place different emphasis on my teaching. Students respond hugely to this. And certainly when I've gone back over the two modules that I use it in heavily, there has been incremental increases in the student feedback on these two modules. And almost exclusively every year, students will ask me for those quizzes so that they can practice themselves. It's a huge peer learning tool for me as well. They can see where they kind of fit within the classroom, and they're using it to gauge their own learning. I'm using it as an active learning tool so that I can tell where I need to reaffirm some of the principles that I've covered. And then the second form of technology that I rely on from the online environment is it's an app that I've been using called Explain Everything. So my online content is delivered through Storyline. We build our lectures through Storyline, we record them. We use universal design principles so that we have, for every lecture, there is an audio, there's a visual, and there's a transcript. Our online learners are working in various hospitals around Ireland. They're working in various hospitals throughout the UK, and sometimes we have a number from Europe as well. They're learning through the various different means. They're audio, visual learners. And I have found that some of the biggest feedback that they give me is on the videos that I create, the animated voiced over videos that I create, and particularly, I suppose, what you would call dry subjects, like how does the blood coagulate? So therefore, when their patients present with anticoagulation, what aspect of the coagulation process are we intervening with? So Technology has been probably the second key area of active learning that I go to and rely on to engage the students. And feedback has certainly suggested that it's successful. Interactivity, and I think a number of my previous speakers have said that interactivity, play, has been a key aspect of their teaching, and I would certainly rely on that. A module that I teach is interventional radiology. It's an area where our students don't get a huge amount of clinical exposure to. So it's an area that's in radiology that's very much a surgical setting. The aseptic technique, students tend to be a little bit of distance away from the activity of the room. So bringing that into the classroom where we bring in our medical devices, we work with our partners in industry where we bring in medical devices, and then I would map that learning to image-based discussions. So we would put up image-based clinical cases. So the devices that they're playing with or that they're manipulating in class is aligned to the case that we're discussing on the screen. And certainly it is appealing to a number of learners who are learning through that tactile reaction, through play, through understanding the physical components of the devices rather than the theory underpinning it. Again, getting a huge amount of feedback. Obviously this year it didn't happen, and certainly I would see it in the students that there is a lack of comprehension on certain aspects of this module based on the fact that we aren't having that interactivity that we have had in previous years. Okay. Moving on from that, then we in the ultrasound module, again, it's an area of advanced imaging that when our undergraduate students are in clinical practice may not get the opportunity to become overly involved with. So I run a number of simulations sessions with them where I bring them in small groups, and having completed a huge amount of the content of the module, they get to practice the content by scanning each other. We do this in small groups. It's guided by myself or one of my colleagues, and the students can scan each other. They scan a range of examinations. It's not linked to grade. It's not a gradable, it's not assessment, and yet I get 100% attendance every year for something that's not mandatory or something that they won't enhance their grade for. The active participation is 100%. The level of comprehension that pre and post these scanning sessions is transformative in their comprehension. The feedback from the students, they have two aspects of the module that they put as number one and number two of their favorite aspects. Despite all our work, the simulated scanning sessions without question every year is their number one favorite aspect of the module. It makes them feel, I think, part of a profession as well. So as I said, it's a professional degree program, and that they should feel part of that profession from a student age, a student involvement. These are the scanning sessions that actually make them realize that they're within the university, that they're part of a bigger group. So I have found it to be hugely impactful from a comprehension, but certainly from a student feedback point of view, being able to simulate clinical practice in UCD has a huge positive impact on students and their feedback and their comprehension. Okay. So from that, I've said that those groups I formulate, they come in small groups, they do their practical scanning session. And it sort of opens up a level of discussion amongst the group with each other, and amongst the group with myself as the instructor. Moving on from that, in that module, then we have a number of forms of assessment, and I suppose assessment's one of the main goals of all our modules, and I run both formative and summative assessment. Within the ultrasound module, I run it as a debate so that students are given a topic that's currently that's a current topic in the module. So for example, in ultrasound, some of the current topics come from early pregnancy, changes in legislation, impacts of misdiagnosis in early pregnancy. And I would give them topics based on the most current kind of controversial or changing roles of ultrasound. I set it in the Fitzgerald debating chambers, and actually that setting, that location, generates a lot of feedback from the student because they feel part of the university. They feel they are able to access some of the services of the university, and it elevates their preparation for the debate. Again, it comes strongly back in the feedback every year that actually being able to do their debate and their assessment in a location like this elevates their participation, elevates the energy in the room, and certainly has a positive impact on the students and what they get even just from the on-campus services. Hugely learning, peer learning from it as well. The other thing there is I generate from that a table quiz that again is not, it's not summative. Stay in their groups and we do a table quiz on the content. It's not again attributable to grade. And I looked back at the attendance and it's between 95 and 100% every year for a quiz that's not summative. So I think active participation is something that is looked at from a table quiz point of view. They see it as a little bit of fun. They see it as a game. And I think going back to some of the previous speakers, it's coming across that students will engage in a lot of activities where there is an element of fun or an element of game. It's not all about grade, even though it probably does attribute to a positive grade impact. Open learning environment, I guess this is a harder topic to address because over the years I've certainly developed a lot of active learning activities for the students or activities for students with a learning outcome. Open learning environment, I believe, is just as important, but probably comes down to the person, and I believe it's my responsibility rather than students to initiate an open learning environment. My role is a stage coordinator, and every year that I undertake this for stage 3, I give a talk that states that I'm both large group mentor and I lay out the calendar. So I tell them what modules they're doing, what's the assessment burden, and show them the strategy that we undergo to make sure that we spread out the assessment burden so that they are involved and they know from the start that there has been a strategy, and I discuss that with them. Feedback from exams, I would always give to the group as a large group. I believe that when they get it together, they can and they hear the group feedback rather than just individual feedback. I get less requests for individual feedback. I invite individual feedback, but I have found that the large group feedback has been more powerful than the individual group feedback. And I think it goes back to what some of the previous speakers said about communication and that open communication, being able to stand in front of that large group and give them the honest feedback as a group, and then invite individual mentoring sessions or progression issues to be discussed, academic plans to be discussed. And I suppose that role has developed where when you are prepared to open the discussion in class to what their needs are and to be available as an individual mentor, but also as a group mentor, students have certainly found that helpful, but in their feedback, every year they comment on the openness of some of the lectures and the approach that the lecturers take. And I would always say it's an open door policy as stage coordinator, so that as problems come up, they're addressed on site. The last thing, obviously none of that is available to my online cohort of students, but I would say that I have learned through having this online program for a number of years that having a tutorial session where all of my lectures are recorded. So they're released at a given time on a given day every week. So students don't necessarily have an open discussion with me or an open line of communication. I have now factored in every year a number of, I call them online tutorials, where I go on Zoom when it works at 6, 7 o'clock in the evening time. And if students want, they come online. This has without doubt got the most feedback because they don't feel part of a community, a learning community. They don't feel part of a course because they're learning in isolation. So even though I have discussion boards, they haven't felt part of a community until these discussions have been delivered every year. And without doubt, every year on year, I'm getting asked for more and more of these discussions that have kind of evolved from tutorial to a sharing of clinical experiences amongst postgraduate students. So I found that the online presence it needs to be dynamic and it needs to be live, and students are responding, and the feedback from the live Zoom or Brightspace tutorials or discussions have evolved to a sharing of clinical practice and clinical needs of our postgraduate community. So I think that's coming to an end. So I feel quite rushed there, but the hopefully you have seen some of the key aspects of active learning and areas of open learning in our undergraduate and postgraduate in diagnostic imaging.
Thank you very much for that, Marianne, and apologies about the technology issue and having to rely on me to go through your slides.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I'm conscious now we've gone a bit over time, but thank you everyone for staying online. We have our final speaker, last but by no means least, Catherine Howell, a colleague in the School of Medicine, who's going to share with us her research experiences in undergraduate medical students, defining research and scholarship experiences. So I'll hand over to you now, Catherine, if you'd like to share your screen.
Thanks, Jonathan. Can you see this?
We can indeed, Catherine, yeah.
Fabulous. My internet is a little bit dodgy, so apologies if it looks like it's getting a bit ropey. I'll just switch my camera off. Yeah, so I just wanted to say thanks ever so much for giving me this invitation to present some of the work that I've been doing in the school that was included in the Teaching Excellence application. And this research is very much a kind of continuation on from the Teaching Fellowship. And this project was funded by a grant that I was awarded from InMed, which is now InHead, a few years ago, looking at undergraduate medical students' awareness and perception of research teaching linkages within their degree program. I think this has probably been alluded to a little bit throughout some of the other presentations as well, and apologies I missed the first hour I was teaching, but I think the question of how a research-intensive university like UCD can embed research into the curriculum to try and enhance student learning and improve some of our graduate attributes is a really important topic. And the research teaching nexus is particularly relevant in professions such as medicine and obviously radiology, where evidence-based practice is absolutely essential for enhancing the quality of patient care and also the student experience as well. But I think it's fair to say that there's a diminishing cohort of clinical scientists who are interested in pursuing a career in academic medicine. This has been observed over the last few years, and it's prompted a number of initiatives to be developed and considered to try and address this issue. However, I think most of these focus on postgraduate research opportunities, whereas actually the evidence suggests that the impact of early research opportunities during the undergraduate medical training strongly encourages students or doctors to pursue a career which is embedded in research, and it also enhances the kind of effective student engagement and has been shown to encourage deeper learning as well. But despite all of this, research is not a compulsory component for or during the medical curriculum. However, I think most medical schools probably recognize the importance of these kind of scholarly activities, and consequently, most medical schools choose to provide students with some kind of research or scholarly experience during their course. If we look at the global approach to research and how it's embedded into the medical curriculum, I think it's probably fair to say that although some elements of the scholarship or research programs are consistent across medical schools, the specific format, the content, the timing, how it's assessed and how it's delivered appear quite unique to each institution. And there's very limited cohesion either at a national level or at a global level or international level. And it's fairly likely that the development of the programs within these medical schools and within universities is based predominantly on pragmatic considerations. So these are things like what resources do we have, Are there any financial constraints, the availability of mentors, time constraints, how long do we have for the students? Rather than a really thorough evaluation or even an understanding of whether or not these research experiences genuinely meet the needs of the students, whether they have some kind of tangible impact on career pathways, and ultimately whether or not they enhance patient care. And to me, it seems logical that in order to ensure that there is this kind of student-centered, effective approach to research experiences, we really need to look at it from the point of view of the student. So an understanding of what the student needs is absolutely vital. And therefore, the aim of this particular project that I did really was to evaluate the undergraduate medical students' awareness and perception of research, and to identify any barriers that exist, and also, very importantly, to identify any examples of best practice. So the approach that I took for this was to conduct focus groups. So I did a focus group for each of the 5 stages of undergraduate medicine in UCD. Obviously, it's a 6-year program. We all know that UCD is a research-intensive university, but currently research is not a compulsory component of the medical curriculum. However, there are instances of research kind of dotted ad hoc throughout different modules through the course, and also the students have the opportunity to complete an SSRA, which gives them an 8-week project over the summer. So the focus groups that I did asked a number of questions which were discussed by the students within the group. So what do medical students understand about doing research in medicine? Are undergraduate medical students aware of research, and how is this awareness developed? What research experiences do medical students have, and what worked well? How have research opportunities or experiences impacted their learning? And finally, is research important in undergraduate medicine? Are there sufficient opportunities? And how can we actually improve on this? And then we took the audio files, we transcribed them, we imported the information into InVivo, which is a qualitative analysis software package. And then we performed thematic analysis to try and identify any areas, any important areas that emerged from the discussions. So obviously, in the interest of time, I'm not going to discuss all the results that came up from this particular study, but I think it is important to say that broadly, the students very much report that research experiences or other scholarly experiences have a very positive impact on their educational experience, on their future careers, and also on society in general. But 2 important areas, I think, emerged from the data. So the first one was the opportunity for research, and the second was the timing of that research. So early stage students are really concerned by their lack of experience, and also the lack of opportunity that they feel that they have. And they almost think that research is something that sort of magically happens later on in the course without actually being available to them at the start of their course. Whereas the late stage students, they identified the importance of research to employability, to their CV, to personal development, and to good medical practice. But ironically, they felt that it should be integrated into the early stages of the course due to the limitations of time that exist towards the end. So it seems like we're missing the boat a little bit here. We're not quite meeting the needs of the students. And this isn't an issue which is limited to UCD. You know, for research experiences to be useful and to be optimized, we really need to take on board the suggestions from the students. And having this kind of student-centered approach, I've sort of summarized it here in this flower-looking diagram, which really has the student at the center of it. And this emerging framework can be applied to both existing programs, but also to new research programs as well. And students really want research to be embedded into the program right from the very start. They want it continued longitudinally throughout their course. They want an equality of access with a defined program overview, which is properly supported by mentors. And I think if we apply this approach, it's likely to have a really positive impact on improving the students' critical analysis, for example, to inspire them to be lifelong learners, to enhance the overall student experience, inevitably to train better physicians. And all of this is likely to have a really positive impact on patient care in society in general. And just to say, finally, this paper is in the late stages of review in +1. So hopefully it will be able to provide some kind of cohesive structure to defining what is best practice in research and scholarly experiences in undergraduate medical schools, either at a national or an international level. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And before I hand over to Sue as our college VPTL and to Cecily to just close off this showcase, just to again thank all of our presenters, again recognise all of the College Award recipients, many of whom are not presenting today. I think it's also important just to recognise the students and the staff who nominated individuals or teams initially as well. And I think we should also recognise we've many colleagues across the college who were nominated by students or staff, but did not go on to submit college level applications as well. We've had a number of our heads of schools from across the college join this showcase. So thanks to the heads of schools, obviously, for supporting teaching and learning activity within their schools. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues in the college education and training group for their work in supporting that activity within their own schools, and especially to our college principal, Cecily Kelleher, for being an advocate for quality teaching and learning initiatives across our college. So I'll hand over to you now, Sue.
Jonathan. And I'd like to thank all of the presenters today for a session which has been really varied, very informative and truly inspiring. I think it's very rare that we get an opportunity to share so much of our very diverse activity in this college, which happens in such a range of contexts and supports such a variety of learners. I also think we managed to cover a lot of ground in a very time-effective way. So thank you guys for doing that. I've certainly learned a lot and really enjoyed the session. So thank you all so much. I would just like to really thank Jonathan McNulty for his excellent work in relation to this, and Beth Kilkenny for all her support in pulling this together. So thank you both so much for organising the event. And I will hand over to Cecily for closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Sue. And wow, we knew this was going to be good, and it certainly was. Lots of splendid examples. We've heard student-centred strategies for engagement, I think, in every one of the presentations. Blending for adult learning, playing with others can be fruitful in gamification terms. Interprofessional collaboration has its dividends. Play to your strengths in learning. Active learning can bring sweet rewards, is asking the answer. A not so private dancer tells us, again, everything can be explained and can be debated. Everyone wants to win the house cup, especially if you can evolve your language. Think global, but act local in incorporating research into your teaching. Thanks again to everyone, to all of those who participated, to all of those who stayed with us this afternoon. We'll be doing this again because I think it has been a really splendid example of the quality and diversity of teaching strategies in our college and in our university. Good afternoon.
Bye, Cecily. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye now.